Welcome back to the world of big money. My name is Caroline Kingma, and I make maps of society. This map was created with the help of financial journalist Thomas Bollen and money researcher Martijn Jeroen van der Linden. Money is depicted here as water. Just as water makes crops grow and flourish, money sets the economy in motion. In part one of our tour, we traced the channels of the waterworks and met the mighty institutions that operate the sluices and control the floodgates. This time, we'll show how money has flowed through the waterworks since the 2008 financial crisis and what that means for society. You don't find out who's swimming naked until the tide goes out. Those are the words of Warren Buffett, one of the richest people in the world. When the money recedes, it becomes clear who's taken on too much risk. Those playing the market with borrowed money get into trouble when share prices fall. Their investments generate less income and they can no longer pay their debts. They're forced to sell at a time when buyers are scarce. That only exacerbates the downward spiral and the water recedes further. Shortfalls on the financial markets then spread to the banks as the value of outstanding loans plummets. It soon becomes clear how unstable the waterworks are. Because we depend on the banks for our savings and payment transactions, banks are essential. That's why they're bailed out with taxpayer money time and again. When the 2008 crisis hit, the US Treasury spent more than $400 billion on bailouts, while states in Europe pumped 1.6 trillion euros into the financial system. And it didn't stop there. The central banks also came to the rescue. Central banks around the world, like the Bank of England and the Federal Reserve in the US, protect the waterworks and guard water levels. Sufficient money flowing through the economy keeps prices stable. If the amount in circulation quickly goes up, so will prices, and you'll get less bread or milk for your money. If water levels drop, it's even more dangerous. That can lead to a drop in prices or deflation, the opposite of inflation. That's what happened in the 1930s during the Great Depression. When stock markets crashed, banks stopped giving out loans. And because money creation in our system goes hand in hand with extending credit, the amount of money out there shrank. Money simply stopped flowing and whole sections of the waterworks went dry. Consumer spending stalled, businesses failed, and millions of people fell into poverty. The social unrest that followed fed the rise in fascism. During the 2008 credit crunch and the ensuing recession, economists feared that low inflation would morph into deflation and dry up the waterworks. Europeans feared the euro currency would not survive. To avert disaster, the central bankers wanted to bring inflation up to 2% at all costs. "Whatever it takes," said Mario Draghi, then president of the European Central Bank. Central banks set their money supply channels for commercial banks wide open. First, they reduced borrowing costs for banks by lowering interest rates. Then, they created new money and used it to buy up massive amounts of the government bonds and business loans held by banks and other financial institutions. That's how the financial sector got hooked up to an intravenous drip of public money. This combination of lowering interest rates and buying assets from banks created excess liquidity for the banks. The banks then opened their floodgates and provided low-cost mortgages, driving up home prices. They also flooded financial markets with cheap credit. The rising water levels pushed up the prices of financial investments. By 2020, share prices had risen, on average, by 3 to 4 times what they'd been in 2008. Shareholders in multinationals gained the most. Since 2016, the European Central Bank has bought up 350 billion euros worth of corporate bonds. Yet only big business met the criteria. And so, big oil, the car industry, Tobacco and arms manufacturers all got their hands on dirt-cheap public money. Take the French luxury goods conglomerate Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy. LVMH was happy to borrow from the central bank while paying shareholders billions in dividends. The company then bought back its own shares, driving the price even higher, and took over competitors like jeweller Tiffany & Co. Hedge fund billionaire Ray Dalio openly warned of the consequences. He pointed out that while money is essentially free for those who already have money and creditworthiness, it's essentially unavailable to those who don't. This contributes, he explained, to the widening wealth gap, opportunity gap, and political divides we see today. In a single year, the chair and CEO of LVMH, Bernard Arnault, saw his net worth go from $75 billion to $195 billion, passing Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos in 2021 to become the richest man on Earth. It was trickle-down economics all over again. The idea that if you flood big banks and corporations with liquidity, money will somehow find its way down to the rest of society. But according to Nobel-winning economist Joseph Stiglitz, that only happens in economic models, and he questioned the rationale behind such a policy. Every year, bankers at the world's leading central banks would predict inflation of 2%. And every year, inflation fell short until 2021. Though the floodgates stayed open for years and banks were flush with money, it failed to reach ordinary people. While researching this map, I was amazed to find out that society has grown only more dependent on the parties that caused the 2008 financial crisis. Why is it, I wondered, that even channels for public money pass through the banks? Surely, a bank's profit motives are not always in line with the public interest. Thousands of bankers and lobbyists have ready access to politicians and regulators. They help draft the legislation meant to fortify the existing waterworks and make it safer. The latest rulebook for banks worldwide is more than 2 million words long. That's 3 times as long as the Bible. But has it helped? Security measures have been tightened. Banks are now required to have more capital on hand, but only marginally more, in the single digits instead of, say, 20 or 30% of their balance sheet. The burden of the complex regulations discourages new banks from joining the ranks. Only institutions with an army of lawyers and risk managers are equipped to tackle the long checklists. More than ever, a handful of big banks dominate the market. And to top it all off, banks are still allowed to sell all kinds of financial products comparable to the ones that set off the crisis. Some are kept off the main books and instead grouped under separate legal entities that aren't subject to banking regulations. These shadow banks, which fall outside the purview of regulators, have outpaced the growth of the regulated sector and now control half of the world's financial assets. Commercial banks remain essential for payments and savings. They know they won't be allowed to fail, and that encourages them to take more risks. The risks are still borne by all of us, as the 2023 bailouts demonstrate, while any profits are for the banks and their shareholders. Through petitions and public debate, activists and scholars have tried to put reform of the financial sector on the political agenda. Why doesn't every community have a viable public alternative to commercial banks? We keep propping up the current system, but why not do more? Closing off the leaky channels and forging new ones. In many places, the world seemed open to banking reform and creating a safe public alternative for our savings. Politicians would graciously accept the big reports and then shelve them forever. That all parts of our financial system are profoundly interlinked became even clearer to me when I explored another part of the waterworks, our pensions and retirement funds. In my country of the Netherlands, most employees are required to put part of their paycheck into a pension fund. Up until the 1980s, that money was used to make direct investments in society, like building affordable homes and infrastructure. One person's savings helped create opportunities for others, and the money remained in the national economy. But the growth in financial markets changed things. Today's pension funds invest far less in the employee's own country. Instead, they outsource such choices to asset managers who invest all over the world. It works like this. To bring in returns of 6 or 7%, asset managers invest money in a variety of places, with a range of risk profiles and rates of return. The low interest rate policy of central banks meant that government bonds and low-risk corporate loans generated lower returns. To hit 6 or 7%, pension funds started taking greater risks, and the share of different investments in their portfolios has shifted. Less money now goes to government bonds, and more goes to stocks. A growing portion of the money in pension funds races along the financial channels between markets in Amsterdam, New York, London, and Shanghai, in search of the highest returns. Thanks to these pension funds, asset management firms like BlackRock and Vanguard have grown into power players who control trillions of dollars in assets. Just like the banks before them, they're now too big to fail, and they're regularly hired to consult for the central banks. Conflicts of interest loom as these consultants advise on policy that has direct ramifications for their own investment portfolios. Private equity firms have also become more important in the management of our pension funds. They buy up companies all over the world, push through layoffs, carve out viable business units, then turn around and sell them off for a profit. Drained of assets, the stripped-down companies are left saddled with debt. That's why private equity firms are likened to vultures and vampires. Using middlemen like Blackstone, the world's largest private equity firm, our pension funds also invest in buying up great numbers of homes in our cities, speculating on flipping them or renting them out. A teacher or nurse required to pay into those same pension funds often can't afford to buy a home in the city where they work and is stuck instead paying ever higher rent. The returns on investment have to come from somewhere. One person's pension is covered by the higher housing costs coughed up by the other contributors. Meanwhile, Blackstone CEO Stephen Schwarzman collected pay and dividends in 2021 and again in 2022 of more than $1 billion. The Netherlands is purported to have one of the best pension systems in the world. But in the course of this project, I've started to wonder, best for whom? Who actually benefits? For years, many people's pensions weren't adjusted for inflation. And all the while, a long chain of financial middlemen proceed to skim off generous bonuses and management fees. In 2020, these costs first topped 10 billion euros. That's more than a quarter of the 35 billion paid out to Dutch pensioners in that same year. In 2022, inflation in Europe and the US soared. Central banks are no longer trying to raise the water level. Instead, there's too much money in circulation. But the central banks can't directly control how much money is flowing through society or how much interest people earn on their savings. They again rely on indirect channels that run via the commercial banks. Those banks ultimately set rates for their customers. Today, the central banks are trying to fight inflation by cooling down the economy. Wouldn't it be more effective to take some money away where it's available in excess, at the top of society? Our monetary system exacerbates inequality and doesn't do a good job of financing the transition to a sustainable economy. It can't stay afloat without safety nets, relief packages, and continual injections of public funds. We can keep it going as is, or we can choose to change how the system works. What the Waterworks looks like is ultimately a political choice. Our choice. With some basic changes to taxation, we can mitigate extreme inequality. Work is currently taxed more heavily than wealth, which means 90% of people pay a far greater share of their income in taxes than the richest 10%. On top of that, the richest 1% and multinationals make use of financial engineering and special deals with the tax authorities instead of paying their fair share. Taxation is meant to fund collective needs and to help redistribute money, correcting excesses. But taxes don't address the root cause, flaws in how that money is distributed in the first place. To make the flow of money more just and equitable, we need to retrofit the waterworks and redesign its architecture. Take, for instance, two channels that the central bank could use to regulate water levels, without relying on commercial banks. One channel already exists and runs between the central bank and the government. It's been sealed off for fear of politicians tapping into the central bank's money source to benefit themselves. Of course it's important that no one can just print money to win souls for the next election. But isn't it just as important that unelected technocrats aren't able to transfer wealth or disrupt the market using new money? Wouldn't it have been better to take those trillions created for the financial sector and have invested the money in housing, education, and a sustainable future instead? A second channel between the central bank and the people that could be used to influence the amount of money out there is helicopter money. The central bank could give all of us equal individual grants, essentially letting money rain down over society. Because wouldn't it be more effective to put money directly into the hands of the people, instead of giving it all to big banks and hoping it trickles down? The helicopter is now tied down, but a new form of money is being developed that could open up this channel: central bank digital currency. It could give people more direct access to their central bank, and that would make it possible to make structural improvements to the waterworks. Whether we can seize this opportunity will depend on how the new currency is designed. We have some decisions to make, because only if people let their voices be heard does the democratic process start rolling. What do we want to water, and what can run dry? Which channels do we need to close off? And what new channels and sluices do we need to forge? In the time to come, we'll draft new architectures for the waterworks and scout out future scenarios. How we set up our monetary system is a public affair. The future of our money is too important to leave in the hands of unelected bankers.